Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another Facts Over Feelings podcast. I believe, Trevor, this is episode number 33. And I know we took a week off last week. I was out of town, but I am back now, and we're ready to talk about a lot of sports that we missed in the last few weeks. And we wanted to get right into the NBA because the NBA season has started. And it seems like it was just yesterday, Trevor, that we had the NBA bubble and we had the teams going at it in the playoffs. And we're right back at it now with the regular season in 2020 and 2021. So I don't know, Trevor. Do you want to get started by talking about any specific teams, like good or bad, that you've seen so far this season?
Yes, so I have two teams in particular that I don't necessarily think have been that bad to start the season, but two teams that I definitely think are going to take a step backwards this year, and two teams that are going to take a step forward this year. And one team I really want to highlight, and this might be a surprise to start the season, but is the 0-3 Toronto Raptors.
Mm.
And I'm thinking to myself, how are the Toronto Raptors 0-3, right? They ran through the Eastern Conference last year, got the 2 seed. They were one win away from making the Eastern Conference Finals. They lost to Boston in the second round. Why is this team 0-3, right? They lost Serge Ibaka, they lost Marcus Gasol, but two old role players, two guys that weren't, they weren't, they weren't in the top
Sure.
3 or 4 in terms of the pecking order on Toronto. Siakam's healthy, Kyle Lowry's healthy, Fred VanVleet's healthy, OG Anunoby's, taking a step in the right direction.
Mhm.
Why is Toronto 0-3? And here's why. Toronto's just not as good of a team. They didn't get better in the offseason, and the rest of the Eastern Conference did get better in the offseason. You look at teams like Indiana, they've improved. Teams like Atlanta, they've improved. Teams like Orlando, they've improved. And there's a reason Toronto's 0-3.
Mhm.
They've lost players and they haven't gotten players in return. This team has stayed pretty stagnant, and the rest of the conference has taken a step forward.
Mhm.
Obviously, I do think Toronto is still going to be a playoff team. Toronto will not go, much longer winless, but it's a little concerning for me that they have started the year 0-3. Final point I want to touch on is I think Pascal Siakam, I don't know what happened to this guy, but he was not very good in the bubble. He has not been very good to start this season. And this was a guy who was not only an all-star last year, he was a top 5 Eastern Conference all-star. He was one of the first 5 Eastern Conference players when they did
They
the all-star
selected him.
draft.
Yeah.
Right. So he's taken a step back. Kyle Lowry's been good. Van Vliet's been good. But overall, this Toronto team has been too stagnant in a conference that's improved. Brooklyn's another team that's gotten better. Go ahead, Ryan. I know you have a lot
Sure.
to say about this.
Well, yeah. So in regards to Toronto, I do want to agree with you. They've struggled to start the year, and I was surprised as to why. And I watched them against Philly tonight, as of Tuesday evening, and they couldn't close the game out. They were leading the entire game. Philly had not led since it was 8-6 in the first quarter. Philly came back and won the game. Why? I don't know. Toronto, for some reason, is lacking a crunch time scorer outside of Kyle Lowry. I didn't see anyone make a shot. Aaron Baines missed a couple wide open threes. Pascal Siakam was nowhere to be found. He missed 15 shots, Trevor, on like 23 or 24 attempts, which is absolutely unacceptable. And to further your point about Siakam, he struggled. And this is a small sample size. But this season, Trevor, he's only hitting 25% of his threes through 3 games. He's hitting 42% of his shots, has 4.5 turnovers a game. I mean, that's not going to cut it. I mean, the star player, this guy has he's an athletic freak. I mean, he's very long. He's a big guy who is extremely athletic and can run the floor very quickly. And he's also he can hit threes at normally a 35 or 36% clip, and he's not doing that this year. And I'm concerned because, as you said, he also struggled in the bubble, which is pretty much to me the reason they lost in the playoffs because Siakam was struggling so badly. You need your star to be on point, so that's been really concerning to me. I do like Toronto in the long term. I know, Trevor, I've said this to you multiple times. I think Toronto's really good. I really don't think they got much worse. And I would argue that outside of Brooklyn, there's not really another team in the East that got like that much better. I mean, you could argue the Wizards, but I'd argue that they've struggled mightily this year with Russell Westbrook. We can go into that later. But overall, Toronto, Siakam concerns me, but I still like them a lot, especially if you can get it together.
I want to say one thing. One thing that I disagree with is
Hmm.
there's a lot of teams that have gotten better in the Eastern Conference. Atlanta got much better. Indiana is a much better basketball team. Brooklyn is a much better basketball team.
Really?
And, when Boston gets Kemba Walker back, they're going to be better than where they're at right now. So I think Toronto is kind of being left behind. And I don't think Toronto is going to be an Eastern Conference threat this year, at least in terms of winning the East. I think they're going to make the
Wow.
playoffs. They could win the first round playoff series. But again, Milwaukee got better too. That's another example that just popped into my head. Anyways, I don't see Toronto beating Brooklyn. I don't see them beating Milwaukee. I don't see them beating Boston. I don't see them beating Miami. I don't see them they could beat Indiana. They could beat Philadelphia, but I don't see them beating any of those top four teams that I just listed. And again, I think there's just a level of stagnancy, and Siakam has gotten worse for whatever reason since the bubble, and they haven't gotten any. They lost players. They lost Marcus All. They lost Ibaka. They lost Kawhi Leonard. They lost Danny Green. They've lost a lot of pieces recently. So for me, this team is I think they're a year or two away from blowing this up and starting over. I think they're going to go into a rebuild in a couple years. I love their coach, Nick Nurse. But for me, Toronto is past their prime right now, and they're a little stagnant.
Hmm. Yeah, so we can move on from this in just a second, Trevor, and move on
Mhm.
to some other teams. But I just want to say, who are the four teams you said that are ahead of Toronto that you don't think that they can beat by chance?
Brooklyn, Milwaukee,
Mhm.
Boston, Miami.
All right, so I just want to say one thing. I'd argue, Trevor, that two of those teams didn't get better. I'd argue actually that the Celtics got worse with losing Gordon Hayward and gaining Tristan Thompson. I mean, I'd argue that that's kind of a loss. My point. I'm not trying to be like picky here. My point is, I think that a team like the Raptors thrives on, and a lot of these teams that we love, thrives on team ball and not hero ball. And I think that it's important to note that the less turnover, generally the better for teams like Toronto, for teams like Miami. And it's part of the reason Miami is so hesitant to make a big deal. I mean, there's been rumors swirling about them making trades for stars. And those haven't materialized because they're like, we don't want to break up what we have because they know it's a special team. They know that they play really well together, and the team. It's part of the reason they got to the finals. So for me, Toronto not getting too much worse, I think is okay because another year under Nick Nurse, another year together adds to that team cohesion. So for me, it's different. Milwaukee did get better. Brooklyn obviously got better, and I think the East run through Brooklyn. And Trevor, if you don't mind me saying,
Mhm.
I mean, so I'm sorry. Do you want to say something about this before we move on?
Real quick, one final point. I
Yeah,
think
sure.
all four of these teams got better, and here's why.
Hmm.
Jalen Brown, Jason Tatum, those guys are going to continue to develop. They're both young.
Well,
Miami, all their young
sure.
players are going to continue to develop as well, right? Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, none of those guys are in their prime yet. None of those guys have reached their maximum potential. And then it's obviously fair to say that Brooklyn and Milwaukee improved because they got better players, better personnel. So for me, Toronto is just being left behind because you know what you will get out of Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet,
Well,
and
Finn,
Pascal Siakam. I feel like they have shown you their maximum potential. I mean, Siakam maybe he's an iffy,
I think he
and
could get better.
Van Vliet is improving every year, but I just don't think I think Toronto's ceiling is being reached, and these other teams
Mm,
that are passing them
okay.
now have not. But that's my final point on that. I know we have a lot more
Interesting.
to talk about,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. So, I mean, do you want to talk about another team that you think is struggling or doing real well this year so far?
Um, another team that I quickly want to talk about that I think
Yeah.
will take a step back, and it's not really necessarily a fault of their own. We've already mentioned them briefly, is the Miami Heat. And I think last year they caught a few teams by surprise, just because Duncan Robinson going undrafted. I don't think anybody thought Tyler Hero was going to be as good as he was. I even think Jimmy Butler, took his game to a new level that not a lot of people thought he could reach. Bam Adebayo, another example of a guy who took a huge step. So
Mm,
I think this year Miami is not going to be the hunter; they're going to be the hunted. And I think there's a certain pressure and a certain level of I guess like adversity they're going to have to overcome because now teams are going to treat them like the Eastern Conference Finals winners that they are. And I think that's going to lead to a little bit of a down year. I don't want to say a down year because I do think they're a top 5 team in the East, but I don't think this team gets past the second round of the playoffs. Um, I think again, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Boston, I think they're all very, very tough to beat again this year. So for me, Miami is in a little bit of a different position than they were last year, and I think that will lead to a step backwards. I don't necessarily think their team is any worse. Their team is probably better. As I just mentioned, some of their young guys are going to continue to develop. but I think there's going to be a little bit more pressure on this team to perform, and I don't know if they will meet those expectations again.
Um, yeah, so for me, I disagree. I mean, I disagree. I think Miami can beat anyone in the East. I do. I think this team has shown it. I think this team, I mean, again, we've talked at length about why I think this team is great, why I like the way this team plays.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk a little bit later or some other time on a future podcast about, some other teams that are modeling the style of play, like Cleveland's trying to, Phoenix is trying to. There are a lot of teams trying to model this team style ball where there's not one star that specifically takes all the shots. You could argue Phoenix has Devin Booker, but I mean, in their win tonight, Trevor, I mean, didn't Devin Booker, I believe, only had 8 points and they won by
Mm-hmm.
30 plus. So, when you have a team play like that, I think you can beat almost anybody when you're doing it at an elite level. And Miami does it at an elite level. And that's why I think that it's wrong to count them out. I think that they can beat anybody. I think they beat Milwaukee last year easily. And I think that, Milwaukee did add some pieces. They added Drew Holiday. But I mean, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make for Milwaukee. I still haven't seen them get over the hump. I still haven't seen it. I need to see them get to the Eastern Conference Finals and compete for a finals berth. I need to see Giannis get that step, and he hasn't done that yet. Brooklyn, I still think that they can beat Brooklyn. Brooklyn's great. They lost Spencer Dinwiddie for the year, which is actually an underrated loss. Spencer
It
Dinwiddie was
is.
fantastic for them last year. And for him to go down this year, if Kyrie gets hurt, which he will at some point this year, I mean, he gets hurt pretty often throughout the regular season, at least. Uh, they're gonna miss him. So I think that that's an important piece that they lost. But I love Miami, and I think it's too soon to count them out. But Trevor, if you don't mind, before we move on to a couple other teams that you wanted to talk about, I want to talk about one team of my own, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
And
Go
and I
ahead.
want
Go
and I
ahead.
yeah, and I want to talk about the Golden State Warriors. And we had a lot of expectation for the Warriors this year. I mean, you and I think we both expected them to take a step forward this
Mm-hmm.
year, to get out of the lottery, to start winning games again. And then Klay Thompson tore his Achilles, and it kind of changed things. But I still thought that they were a playoff team. I know you did as well, even without Klay
Mm-hmm.
Thompson. And you know
Mm-hmm.
what? They have struggled mightily to start the season, and more than I thought they would. Kelly Oubre, in particular, has struggled a lot, and I think that it's very strange. I think it's more of a mental thing at this point. Trevor, he was 7 for 40. Oubre was in his first 3 games, and
Wow.
all of those baskets were putbacks or layups. Not a single jump shot. Kelly Oubre did not make a single jump shot in the first 3 games. He missed every
Interesting.
single jump shot, and he made one tonight. He made one tonight, so there you go. Maybe that'll help him. He
He
played a
hit a
much
three
better.
tonight.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he played a much better game tonight, much more efficient than his first three. And I think that's big for Golden State. My point being, they've struggled more than I thought, but I still think we don't want to overreact. I think this Golden State team can easily make the playoffs. I think Oubre is a good second piece. I think James Wiseman has impressed Trevor. I really like what I've seen from him so far. And Draymond Green's still not back, which is an underrated piece. People forget he's a fantastic distributor on the elbow. He's there's a reason he is up there in triple doubles and doesn't put points on the board but puts rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks on the board. So I think getting a piece like Draymond back is going to help the Warriors a lot, and I think people are overreacting a little bit with their struggles so far.
Um, no, I think this is a fair team to mention. I think there are some legitimate concerns with Golden State. I think Andrew Wiggins and Kelly Oubre, although Andrew Wiggins played a very good game tonight,
Mm,
Andrew Wiggins has
you're
not
right.
impressed very much since he's been to Golden State. And I do want to talk about Kelly Oubre a little bit because I followed Kelly Oubre very closely last year. And I think Kelly Oubre is still mentally getting over the Phoenix trade. And I know that might sound crazy, but I really do think Kelly Oubre was bought in to the Phoenix Suns culture, to the fan base, to the city in general. And the fans were buying in back. The fans rallied around Kelly Oubre. They rallied around, the style, the looks, the swag that he brought to this team and to this organization. And for him to just get traded one day and for how he found out, he was at the practice facility and another one of the former teammates, Check Diallo, goes, "Hey, did you see the news?" And Kelly Oubre found out,
Yeah.
while he's at the Phoenix Suns practice facility that he got traded. So I think for me that was big mentally. I think he was a little shell shocked, a little blindsided, and I think it's translating into his play. I do think eventually he'll get over it, right? It's still only been 4 games. We don't want to overreact, but I do think mentally Kelly Oubre is still trying to get over that trade. Steph Curry looked great tonight. The rest of the team is just not that good, and I think I think I in particular overrated their role players because a lot of their role players last year were getting very good game experience because they were the worst team in the West and they were pretty much tanking, right? But
Yep.
I think overall this is just not a very good basketball team. I mean, if Draymond and Clay come back, it becomes a better basketball team. But with the guys they have right now,
Okay.
Wiggins hasn't been great. Oubre will get better, but overall, I just don't think this team is as good as we thought. But I do think they getting Wiggins or getting Draymond back will help them, particularly on the defensive end. And
Yes.
if they do get Clay back next season, that will help them out a lot. But for this season, this team is just not that good, and it's a tough Western Conference. So we'll see
Yeah,
how they
we
fare.
we can move on in 1 second. I just want to say that when Clay comes back, I mean, they're a playoff team without a doubt. I don't think there's really much debate
I
there.
agree with that. I
Okay,
agree
yeah.
with that.
And I want to say you made a great point about bringing up Wiggins. I totally forgot to bring him up, and you are right. I think Wiggins is very overrated. He's just an inefficient shooter. That's all there is to it. And when you're an inefficient shooter who doesn't play defense, that's a big problem.
Mhm.
So I mean, like he struggled to start the year. He was 6 for 18 when they lost to the Bucks by 40, and you just can't have that. You can't have that when your team needs offense. When you're lacking one of the best shooters of all time, someone needs to step up. So it wasn't him. And Trevor, I don't know if we want to move on. Do you want to talk about some teams that you've been impressed with so far this
Yeah,
season?
I'm gonna go. I'll go real quick.
All right.
Atlanta. I was high on Atlanta coming into the year. I thought they'd be a 7 or 8 seed. I think they've exceeded my expectations a little bit. I think Trey Young has been fantastic to start this season.
Mm,
Just looking at their roster construction, Danilo Gallinari has been a nice addition for them as well. And Cam Reddish, I wouldn't forget about Cam Reddish. I think he's been pretty good for them in their first couple games this season. But I just look at this Hawks team and I like what I see. You know, they're athletic. They got a big man in Clint Capella. They obviously have their star player in Trey Young. And this is just a much improved basketball team. And you're seeing it. They're 3-0. They look great. I wouldn't be surprised if they made the playoffs. In fact, I do think they're going to make the playoffs. Another very underrated signing, I think, for them was Rajon Rondo. I think having that veteran voice, that veteran leadership in the locker room will fare well for the Hawks. And overall, this is a much deeper team. I mean, they got guys like Bogdan Bogdanovic coming off the bench, Rajon Rondo coming off the bench. Danilo Gallinari didn't even play in their last game.
mm,
Cam Reddish, as I mentioned, DeAndre Hunter. You know, this is just a well-constructed team and a team going in the right direction. So I wanted to highlight the Atlanta Hawks.
yeah.
And one final team I want to touch on before I hand it back over to you, Ryan, is I'll touch on my Phoenix Suns.
There you go.
And for me, I've just been very impressed with how they're winning basketball games. Ryan mentioned a couple minutes back about this Miami Heat type basketball where it's not one mouth to feed. It's a whole team. It's winning as a team, losing as a team, distributing the scoring evenly. And this is just an incredible stat for me. The Phoenix Suns, again, in their game tonight against the Pelicans, they won 111 to 86. They won by 25. It was even more of a blowout than that.
Wow.
The Suns had six scorers in double digits. Chris Paul and Devin Booker were not one of them. So I think that gives you an idea of how deep this team really is. And I think Chris Paul made a great point in the post-game interview. He said, with this condensed schedule and with, the shortened NBA season playing so many games, so many back-to-backs, having a deep team is going to fare very, very well as you get into the meat and potatoes of the season. I think the Phoenix Suns are one of the deepest teams in the NBA. We're probably going to be top 3 in the NBA in bench points, and it showed again tonight. And I really like what I've seen out of my Suns. I'm very excited with how they've played so far, and we'll see how this goes. But I think it's a very well constructed roster, and I love Monty Williams at the helm. I said it last year. He's going to be a great hire for this team.
Mm.
And Chris Paul is great, and I think it was a great trade. It's proving right now to be a great trade. So I'm very high on the Phoenix Suns. Ryan, I'll hand it to you if you have any thoughts on those two teams or if you have any of your own.
Yeah, so I'll do two things. I want to address, I agree with you about the Suns, and I'll talk about them along with another team in just a moment. But I wanted to talk about the Hawks for a quick second. I, Trevor, do you know off the top of your head their record so far this season? I don't.
Defeated, they're 3-0.
They're undefeated. Okay, so they're 3 and
I
0.
believe they're 3-0.
Mm,
Yes, they're 3-0.
okay,
Yes, they
yeah,
are.
you're all right. Yeah, so they've started off the year very strong, and I think this team will be a low end playoff team. I think that's safe to say. I don't think they're ready to be a top half Eastern Conference team. but they've
Mm,
definitely made strides. And I think it's worth noting, Trevor, that they still have some injuries out there. I mean, Clint Capella was out for multiple games. He just got back on a limits restriction in game 3 of the season. So getting him back, a true center, will be very valuable for this team. And I really like, I've said it for a while now, I really like John Collins and Trae Young as a duo on the offensive end. John Collins is an absolute monster. The guy can hit a three. He runs in transition perfectly. And he's just a monster around the rim too. Grabs rebounds and is just, just has rim rattling dunks. And so he's just really fun to watch. And Trae Young's fantastic on the offensive end, no doubt about it. Terrible at defense, but Rajon Rondo can mask that. Chris Dunn is injured right now, I will note, which is key because we highlighted that signing in the offseason. Chris Dunn going to, or yeah, going to the Hawks. So for him to be hurt is kind of, you know, something to note, something that I'd hesitate jumping on the Hawks for bad defense until he comes back. And I just like their 3-point shooters. I think Bogdanovich was a nice scorer to have off the bench. I think Kevin Herter's he's an awesome shooter. He's Kyle Korver 2.0. At least that's how he plays. And I love watching this team. It's a lot of fun. It was fun last year, and it's even more fun this year now that they win. And DeAndre Hunter, I love in particular. I think he's a great 3-and-D player. Him and Cam Johnson, they have similar roles on these two teams, and I really I like both of them, but DeAndre Hunter, I think, is going to be a fantastic player in particular. And then moving on, Trevor, before we get done with the NBA, since you brought up your team, I'm going to bring up my team for one quick second here, and I'm going to bring up the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I just wanted to say that this team to me has surprised me. It surprised me, Trevor. Since LeBron left, this team has struggled to find an identity, right? And that's always the key as a team, to find an identity, find who you are. How do you win games? Who are you as a team? And this Cavs team has finally seemingly found an identity, and it's that of the Suns and the Heat trying to create team ball, to pass the ball a lot, to create open looks for your teammates, to not be selfish and hold the ball and dribble it for 8 to 10 to 20 seconds even, like some players do on some teams. This team, the ball is moving across the court constantly, and it's why they started 3-0, and they lost tonight to the New York Knicks. And while that seems like a terrible loss, which it is, they lost by 9 points while shooting 22% from three. And I think that, to me, that's really telling. I think that this team was passing the ball very well, and they stuck to their identity, but they just couldn't hit the shots. And to me, it's okay to me if a team like this, teams that try to do this style of ball, they while they have they lack the skill to win some of these games, they don't lack the play, the actual play. Like they played well, they just didn't have enough skill to win the game. So I think that's key for young teams like this. I'm really happy that the Cavs seemingly have an identity on what they want to be, a scrappy team who just moves the ball constantly, plays as a cohesive, selfless unit, and is scrappy on the defensive end. I really like that. JaVale McGee has been a great addition for this team. I was skeptical of the trade. I didn't even know if he wanted to stay in Cleveland, but he's been fantastic. Great backup center to go with Andre Drummond. They block a lot of shots. And JaVale McGee has threes in 3 straight games, Trevor. He's hit a 3 in 3 straight games. JaVale McGee, the 3-point shooter. Who knew? But I just, this Cavs seems fun to watch this year. So I'm excited to just watch them, even if they miss the playoffs.
I'll touch on the Cavs real quick. They're
Yeah.
going to be bottom 3 in the East, no doubt in my mind.
Okay.
I'm not sold on this team at all. I mean, they beat the Pistons in double overtime. Great. They beat the 76ers. Okay, that was a good win, I guess. And then you put up then you put up 86 points against the Knicks. I'm sorry, this team is not very talented. I think you make a fair point that they are going to stick to an identity, but they're going to lose a lot of games this year. They're not very good. Don't be fooled by this 3-1 start. You saw it tonight. If this team doesn't rain in a bunch of threes, they can't score. I watched a quarter of this game before I left to do some things. And Colin Sexton, I probably watched his worst quarter of his career, but to me, he looks small out there. He was out of control. He got blocked 3 or 4 times at the rim, and he's still not a great shooter. But I think I clearly watched him at his worst because he probably played better after that. Point here is, this is what happened with my Phoenix Suns last year, right? We got off to a hot start. We beat the Clippers early in the season. We beat the 76ers early in the season. And then what happens? Injuries, DeAndre Ayton gets suspended for 25 games. I don't think that'll happen to a Cavs player, but the rest of the league is going to figure it out pretty quickly. This Cavaliers team is still a few years out from being any kind of contender. They've gotten off to a good start, yes, but tonight was very telling. There's a long ways to go here. Promising start, long ways to go. They're not making the playoffs or the play-in game. I will bet money on it
Oh
right now on
yeah,
the podcast.
I mean, I want to say that like you're before we move on. I mean, you're right. I mean, this team's not going anywhere in the playoffs this year. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind about that. This team more than likely will miss the playoffs and probably won't even get the play into the play-in game. Although I think that's possible. I think you're right. This team doesn't have the talent yet, but I want to say, Trevor, to say that they rely on 3-pointers is not. I just That's not what they do. The Cavs actually going into the Knicks game, so this will change after tonight. They were first in 3-point shooting percentage at 43%, but they were 29th in 3-pointers taken. So they didn't take a lot of threes, but they made their threes. And I think they were 29th in threes taken per game. And it's an extremely small sample size, but with this new team, my point being, they don't rely on the 3-point shot to win games. They rely on hitting their open shots when needed, whether that's in the paint or at the 3-point line. So for me, they don't rely on one specific shot. So I just wanted to clear that up. And one other thing, I mean, Sexton is undoubtedly growing, and he's a very small player. The guy's 6'1". You're right; he does look small out there. But not a single person in the NBA can keep him in front of them. Not a single person in the NBA. He's one of the fastest players in the NBA. And while he does look out of control at sometimes, and you saw him at his worst, Trevor watched him for context when Sexton started 0 for 6 tonight. And going into this game, he was averaging about 29 points per game on 59% shooting going into this game in the last 10
Mm-hmm.
games. So, just some context. And I think that everyone, needs to realize that, uh, you know, he watched him at his worst. So I think that Sexton is continually underrated, and that's fine. He can be continually underrated. I think that Sexton, by the end of the season, will have established himself as, one of the best scoring guards in the East. I think. I think he's going to be easily uh, top 10 in the East in scoring, maybe even higher. I mean, he's averaging, I think, 25 or 26 right now. And I think it'll continue to be around that number, maybe a little bit lower. So he's going to score a lot this year, and I think people are going to continue to underrate him. But he is very small and still raw. So you're right. This Cavs team will miss the playoffs, but they will be more fun to watch this year, and they will be harder to beat than they were in previous years. Um, but Trevor, I think if it's okay with you, we've talked enough about the NBA. We've talked at length about the NBA. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk more about it next week as teams play another week, a slate of games. But I wanted to move on to the National Football League and what's happened since we've been away. And more specifically, Trevor, I want to talk about head coaches. I wanted to talk about, some coaches that you thought uh, who you think deserves to be coach of the year at this moment in time. And I know there's still one more game to be played, and that's very important for a lot of these coaches to decide if they deserve to
Mm-hmm.
be coach of the year. Uh, Particularly some of my top contenders. This next game, this next Sunday is going to be very important to determine if they're going to be the coach of the year. But Trevor, do you have any coaches that stand out to you? Any coaches you think as of now deserve to win this award?
Absolutely. I think there's a short list. I say there's
Okay.
about 3 or 4 guys that can really win this award.
Okay.
But I think the guy that truly does deserve it, and it's very close between first and second place.
Hmm.
Um, right now on my list, I would have Brian Flores as the runner-up for Coach of the Year, but my winner is Sean McDermott, and I think you can just see it. Josh Allen is a perfect example of why Sean McDermott should win Coach of the Year. The development of Josh Allen, the development of this organization. The Buffalo Bills were a laughing stock team. They were a Cleveland Browns team. They were a
Yeah.
team that was perennially missing the playoffs. They were not a very, you know, I should say, like, they didn't have a lot of cohesion within the
Sure.
organization. They weren't very successful. Sean McDermott comes in and completely turns everything around. It took a couple years. They made the playoffs last year, lost a game they should have won in the playoffs to Houston. And now this year, they are a Super Bowl contender, and I mean that. And I think that attributes to Sean McDermott, his ability to develop Josh Allen, his ability to develop this roster and continue to grow this roster.
Mm.
And I think the defense is another great example. This defense was pretty bad in the first half of the season. Now they are really, really, really good. And you saw it on full display last night on Monday Night Football against a limited offense, but the
Sure.
defense is there. And for me, the way Sean McDermott has just developed this team and the way he's just completely turned around this entire Buffalo organization, in my opinion, is the reason why he should be coach of the year.
Hmm.
He won't get the number one seed in the AFC. That's okay. But Buffalo, in my opinion, is playing better than Kansas City right now. And this is a very, very good team. And Sean McDermott has done an unbelievable job with this team.
Trevor, I do agree with you. Sean McDermott has done an absolutely fantastic job with this organization and with this team, and he's deserving of this award. Although I do disagree on who I think should win. I think that for me it's a two-horse race between Brian Flores and Kevin Stefanski, and Week 17 to me is one of the key. It's going to be a key week to see who I think should win this award, because I think Kevin Stefanski should win the award if he's able to beat the Steelers and make the playoffs. I think to get a Cleveland Browns team who's been bad for 15, 16, 17 years, to the playoffs, turning around from Freddie Kitchens, from Hugh Jackson, from all these atrocious coaches. And just the organization was a mess. Even last year, Trevor, at this time, with all the talent, the organization was a mess. It was just a chaos in the organization. The talent, Baker Mayfield was struggling. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. He couldn't seem to get it together. Was he a bust? We don't know. Was Odell a mistake? There were a lot of problems with the organization. And Stefanski came in and instilled a culture. He came in and provided discipline. He came in and provided a game plan. He came in and provided stability for these players and taught them, to how to get better. He just was a much better head coach than most of these head coaches the Browns have had in the last 2 decades. So I think that alone, to turn around the Cleveland Browns organization, merits, deep consideration for coach of the year, especially if he gets to 11 wins and gets a playoff berth. I think that definitely gets him over the top, in my opinion. However, I think Brian Flores also merits consideration because he turned this Miami team around, Trevor, in 2 years. I mean, this team was really, really, really bad.
Mhm.
Even in the first half of last year, they were bad. But something clicked halfway through last season. Something changed within this organization. The defense started stepping up. The offense started making some more plays, and they started winning games. And now, Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they're sitting at 9 or 10 wins on the year. I believe it's 9 wins
Or
on the year.
10.
Or is it
10
10?
wins.
It's 10 wins on the year after their win over the Raiders. And this team is just not looking back. I mean, the sky's the limit for this team. I love this defense. And I love Tua. I do not like what Brian Flores did with benching Tua constantly, but we can talk about that later. But he's finding ways to win games. And I think Brian Flores has changed this team. He's, made this team better. He's turned the whole organization around. And I think that's the key for the coaches that win Coach of the Year. Just turning teams and organizations around from laughing stocks to being respected in this league. And when Sean McDermott's done that, Trevor, I think it's been a multi-year process. I think last year, right, they were very good last year, and they were up and coming 2 years prior. So I think if anything, McDermott maybe, there were other coaches that deserved it last year, but McDermott maybe, for turning the team around, maybe should have been in more serious consideration last season. But all three of these guys deserve it, although I think Stefanski is the front runner with Flores right there if Stefanski can't pull out a win over Pittsburgh.
There's two reasons why Stefanski will not win this award. One, you can't win Coach of the Year if you finish third in your division. Two, the two guys that you're talking about, Flores and McDermott, are going to have the same amount. Well, McDermott, I should say, over Stefanski McDermott has more wins than Stefanski on the year, and winning games matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Buffalo is going to go 13-3. I think they're going to beat Miami unless they don't try Week 17, which I would assume they will.
Miami can beat them.
Miami can beat them, but I think Buffalo will win.
Okay.
What Sean McDermott has done building this team in a multi-year process, right? The key word is building the team.
Of course.
Kevin Stefanski inherited a very talented roster, just needed better direction. Brian Flores, I think, is a very close second because he's very similar to McDermott, and he built the team, right? But if McDermott beats Flores and goes 2-0 against Brian Flores this season, then I think McDermott should win the award over him. For me, Stefanski inherited a very talented roster, and he put together a very solid game plan, or a very solid direction, right? But that's what Sean McVay does every year. That's what Kyle Shanahan does every year. It's going to translate to a 10-win season for the Browns, but that's not Coach of the Year. Sean McDermott built this team from the ground up. He has turned them into a Super Bowl contender, and that should be rewarded. And I think Stefanski, if he does this next year and turns this Browns team into a 13-win team and wins the division, then yes, I think he is a contender for Coach of the Year. And he still is this year. But it's clear. I just don't it's clear McDermott has been passed up on this award a couple times. He should not get passed up on it again.
All right, and we can move on from this in a second. I'll just give one last rebuttal. I just think, I think saying that being third in your division disqualifies you from the well, not disqualifies,
It
but
is.
but but but
Come on,
but I
it's
feel
team
like that.
success.
But I feel like that's a little unfair because the Browns could be an 11-win team and be tied for second in their division. Like this division is absolutely
You lose
sensational
to the
this year.
You lose to the Ravens twice. You've lost to the Steelers. I mean, look, Stefanski's beaten a lot of bad teams, and the Browns have beaten a lot of bad teams. That is objectively true.
I mean, I'd argue the
Beat a
I'd
playoff
argue
team. Beat
I'd
a
argue
playoff team.
I'd argue that the Bills have a terrible, like a really bad division that they're in, and they've gotten
I mean,
tough.
they're in a bad division, but they crushed the Steelers, right? Who else did they just beat recently? They crushed the Steelers. That's the big one. I don't have their schedule pulled up. And they're on a 6-game win streak. They haven't lost in however long.
Yeah,
So,
well,
and they're a Hail Mary away from being on an 8-game win streak. I mean, Buffalo just isn't losing. And they beat
sure,
Pittsburgh by a ton. I'll hold that as a good win.
sure, and I do agree with that, but I think it's important to note just how, you know, just how bad the Cleveland Browns were. I mean, it's been the joke. The Bills were a joke. The Browns are the joke for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been turned around in one season. At the end of the day, both these coaches I think deserve it, but I just think if the Browns are able to make the playoffs this Sunday, I think you turning the Browns into an 11-5 team with the terrible defense that they have, I think is something that you can't turn away from. I also want to note Matt LaFleur has done an unbelievable job. I think he should win Coach of the Year at some point during his tenure in Green
He
Bay.
has done a good
Not
job.
this year, but I just want to note him because he's been fantastic. And some people doubted him, but I always thought he was going to succeed. And I like the hire, and I like what he's done with that organization. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think McDermott will win the award. These smaller, I'd argue the Bills are getting the media attention. Media attention is everything for these awards. So I think McDermott will win it. And he deserves it. So we'll see what happens, though. All three of these coaches, Trevor, I think, have a very good argument for it.
They have a case. They all three have a case.
Yeah. So, but we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see. But with that, Trevor, I wanted to move on, and I wanted to move on to talk about a few quick games here, and I wanted to talk about one of your games, Trevor. Do you want to talk about the I think the Seahawks and the Rams game?
I do. This was a very interesting game actually because it was a lot more defensive than you might think, right? I mean, the Rams were held to, I believe, their season low in points. They were held to 9 points. The Seahawks only scored 20 themselves. And I think Seattle has gone through a mid-season identity change. I mean, this team, the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season was let Russ cook, and Russell Wilson was everyone's favorite to win MVP. He was putting up crazy stats. They were putting up crazy offensive numbers. And then all of a sudden, they started to realize, wait, our defense isn't very good, and we're losing games now. They've completely reinvented the defense. I think bringing in Carlos Dunlap was great. Jamal Adams, I think, has had a solid year. Bobby Wagner's had a solid year as well. And all of a sudden, this team has turned into a run-first team again. They've been able to run the ball much more effectively, and a team that can rely on its defense. And I think that's going to be huge come playoff time. Obviously, they have an MVP caliber quarterback, which is key to winning any Super Bowl. You got to have a really, really good quarterback, in my opinion. But this team can win multiple ways now. They can throw it, they can run it, and they can play defense. And I think that's going to be huge come postseason time. Final point I want to make on this game. Thank you, Los Angeles, because you lost and you lost to the Jets. You are now 9-6. And without Jared Goff and Cooper Kupp week 17, you are giving my Cardinals a chance to make the playoffs. So I thank you for that as well. But I really want to focus on Seattle's identity change and how they've evolved throughout the season and how I think this team can definitely win the NFC, and they can win the NFC in multiple ways.
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting. For me, I've regarded the Seattle defense as a bad defense all season. But Trevor, you make a very compelling point. I mean, this defense, Trevor, in the last 7 weeks has only allowed over 21 points, I believe, one time. So this defense has really stepped up, and while they have played some worse offensive teams, like I'll say a very, very struggling Rams team, a Jets team, a Washington team, a Giants team, a lot of teams that have really bad offenses. Regardless, they've performed well, and that's very important, especially when you're coming down the stretch and your offense is kind of sputtering.
Mhm.
Russell Wilson's definitely taken a little bit of a step back from his hot start to the season. I think that,
Right.
his receivers have also seen a hit in production, and Chris Carson's been hurt on and off this whole season, and that's kind of hurt them a little bit, but they got him back, and that's very important for come playoff time. And Rashad Penny, Carlos Hyde are also healthy, so they have running back depth. And,
Mhm.
I think this is a solid team. To me, the Seahawks aren't what I thought they were. I don't think I doubt I have my doubts about them in terms of offensive firepower come playoff time. I'm not sure, however terrific Russell Wilson is, if they can hold up, if their defense can hold up against playoff caliber offenses. I have my doubts. But we'll see. But we'll see. Maybe they'll be able to hold on. They did hold the Rams to 9 points. Although I will note Jared Goff continued his major struggles. He's really, really struggled, Trevor, in these last few games. And now he's hurt. And now I believe Trevor's going to miss week 17 against the Cardinals, which is going to be a very, very big loss for them, even though he's been playing badly, Jared
Mhm.
Goff. And this offense just doesn't look explosive. I mean, Robert Woods and Cooper Cup just don't look like they're not doing too much, and they're playing very conservatively because of Goff's limitations, because they don't trust him really to throw down the field as consistently as these other quarterbacks. They're limiting him to more shorter passes, a more conservative offense, and that's hurting them. So we'll see if the Rams can make the playoffs. But all of a sudden, they might be on their way out of the playoffs come Week 17. But we'll see what happens come Sunday, and it will be a very, very entertaining game. We'll see if the Rams defense can hold the Cardinals offense and allow, and we'll see if their backup quarterback will be enough to get them over the top.
I want to make 2 points, or actually, I want to make one final point. And I,
Sure,
I like how you brought up Jared Goff because I was actually just thinking about this today.
sure,
There are two levels of quarterback play, and quarterbacks can be successful at either level. There's the level one quarterbacks. I like to call them the Matt Ryans, the Jared Goffs, the Jimmy Garoppolos. These quarterbacks rely on timing, rely on precision, rely on play design, but they're not very good at ad-libbing. They're not very good at, making plays on the run. They're not very good at making something out of nothing, right? These are guys that rely on, quick three-step drops, timing plays, short throws, but they can be very successful. Matt Ryan, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jared Goff have all been to a Super Bowl, right? I mean, Matt Ryan won MVP one year, I believe. I think the year they went to the Super Bowl, he won MVP, but they're never going to be the level two quarterbacks. And these are the quarterbacks: Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson. I'll throw in Kyler Murray, but that was more Kyler Murray at the beginning of the year. Guys who can make something out of nothing, guys who can ad lib plays, guys who, they don't need a play call. They can just go out there and play backyard football and be successful.
sure.
And that's just not Jared Goff. And there's gonna be limitations with that. And we saw it against Seattle. The longer that a play takes to develop, the less Jared Goff will be successful. There were a couple of plays. There was one play in particular I want to highlight where this was Jared Goff's decision making, but he rolled out of the pocket, probably could have ran forward for 5 yards. He had no receivers open downfield, probably hit, like I said, had a 4 or 5 yard run. Instead, he tries to throw a really tough pass, throws an interception. So his inability to ad lib, his inability to make a play on the run, his inability to make something out of nothing will always hold him back. And again, he can be a very good quarterback, a very successful quarterback under a guy like Sean McVay, but there will be limitations there. And we've seen it time and time again.
I mean, without a doubt. And the tragic thing is in the NFL, Trevor, I mean, it's hard to get an elite quarterback in this league. And you see these teams like, I mean, the Rams, you see teams like the Niners, you see the teams like the Browns have limitations at quarterback, good but not great quarterbacks. And while some of them might flourish for short periods of time, they always come back down to earth a little bit. And you just have to work with what you have. And it always, we'll see if the Rams, can work it out long term with Goff. But I fear that come, long term, I'm not sure if Goff, I'm not sure if Goff will be the guy. It'll be really interesting to see. I mean, I'm not sure. We'll see what opportunity arises for the Rams if they can get another quarterback or not. But I'd keep my eyes peeled if I were the Rams. Just kind of
Mm-hmm.
always be on your toes, on the lookout for a quarterback that maybe could be an upgrade over Jared Goff. But Trevor, with that, I wanted to move on to another game. I wanted to move on to kind of a surprising game, a game that not a lot of people, expected to happen in the
Mm-hmm.
Chiefs and the Falcons. And I want to talk about this game because I was surprised, Trevor. I was surprised with the struggles of the Kansas City Chiefs. I did not expect it. They won this game by 3.
Mhm.
And really, Trevor, they should not have won this in regulation. Young Hoku, the kicker for the Atlanta Falcons, a Pro Bowl kicker, by the way,
Right.
has missed one kick all season, and he missed the second one as time expired, or with 30 seconds left
Mhm.
against the Chiefs, and it would have been the field goal to tie it up, and it just didn't happen. I The Chiefs got another lucky break. I don't know how else to put it. This offense surprisingly did not look good against the worst secondary in football. The Falcons, Trevor, have the worst
Yeah.
secondary in all of football. It's quite bad. Um, and I don't really know what to say. Mahomes was okay. He threw a terrible pass in the end zone, right to a linebacker in coverage. And it just, I don't know. This offense was kind of surprising to me. I will say, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was out. So Darrell Williams got the bulk of the carries at Le'Veon Bell, which surprised me. And Tyreek Hill was also limited due to a hamstring injury, so he played limited snaps. That's also worth noting. But it's just, I was surprised they struggled so much against a terrible Falcons secondary. And I want to talk about the Falcons for 1 second before I toss this over to you, Trevor.
Mhm.
And I need to point out just one thing, and just one thing only. Todd Gurley, I feel bad for this guy. He's 25 years old, and he has arthritis in his knees, and he had one of the biggest rises and one of the biggest falls I've ever seen from a star player of any position. I mean, he was the best running back in football not even 2 years ago, really. And now he's probably going to be a backup at this point from this point on. I mean, he lost his starting job last week to Ito Smith. He lost his starting job to Ito Smith, a guy who has been a career backup for the Atlanta Falcons, for years now. And it's just, it kind of, it's disappointing and sad to me because I had hopes for Todd Gurley. I had hoped he could come back stronger, but ever since he got that arthritis injury, he just hasn't been the same, hasn't been able to make the same cuts. He's not able to make the same, he's not able to have the same lateral movement, the ability to force missed tackles. And it's just, it's cratered his career. So I just feel bad about him. I feel bad what's happened to him, and I just wanted to point that out. Trevor, do you've anything you want to say about this game real quick or not?
Yeah, I want to say one thing or a couple things, but one,
Sure.
it for Kansas City, I wouldn't be too worried, and here's why. As you mentioned, they're a little beat up. They don't have Clyde
Yeah.
Edwards-Helaire. Tyreek Hill was on limited snaps, and they're
Yep.
like every team in the NFL come week 16, week 17. They're beat up.
Mm,
But here's why I wouldn't be concerned. They clinched the number one seed. And look, Atlanta's a good football team. I shouldn't say a good football team. Atlanta is a very capable football team. They have a dynamic offense when fully healthy,
mm.
and they've been in a lot of close games this year. There have been a lot of games that could have gone Atlanta's way that didn't. So I do
Okay.
want to say that Atlanta is better than what their record shows. Obviously, Kansas City probably should have won this game by more.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say Kansas City's bored because they're definitely not bored. I just think Kansas City is I think they're just kind of like waiting to get to the playoffs. I think they're kind of just
Maybe.
trying to like drag their way through the rest of the regular season. Now they clinch the number one seed, and
Yep.
they're now going to have, depending on if they want to, they're going to have 3 weeks of rest, right? I don't know if they're going to play Mahomes, Kelsey, they probably won't play Tyreek Hill if he's a little
Probably
shaken
not.
up.
No.
But this team is going to have plenty of time now to get healthy, get some rest, and they're going to be completely geared up when they play their AFC divisional game. Number two, again, the playoffs go through Kansas City. I mean, they're going to get to stay at home. In the divisional round, they're likely going to play a team like, I don't know how the NFL's doing it. So I don't know if they're going to play 4 or 5 or if they're going to play the lowest seeded wild card team. So in that case, they could play a Baltimore or like an Indianapolis or even a Cleveland or a Miami, right? They could play a really, good wild card team.
Yeah.
But I think more than likely they're going to play a very beatable team in the AFC divisional. And then it's going to come to the AFC championship game where I think they'll play Buffalo. And I think that's going to be a very interesting game. Anyways, one more point I want to touch on with Atlanta.
Okay.
I think Atlanta showed what they can be. And I think Atlanta showed you that they can compete with anybody, but they just got to find a way to, and I don't know if this comes with a new head coach,
I
but
think
they're
it
just going to
does.
have to learn, they're going to have to learn to find a way to win games again.
Yep.
And I think it's just some kind of mental curse. Ryan, you and I have talked about this multiple times.
Mm,
There's just something wrong. with Atlanta when it comes to closing out games are a lot like the LA Chargers. They're just going to have to learn how to win again. And I think
Yep.
that's going to come with a coaching change and a culture change. But I think Atlanta is due for a bounce back year next year. And don't worry too much about Kansas City. I think they're going to be fine. I think the bye week and the whole 2-3 weeks off is going to do them very well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. They've been banged up, and we'll see what they can do in the playoffs. I mean, I expect them to win the Super Bowl, barring catastrophic injury. But we will see what happens come playoff time. It will certainly be interesting with their potential Buffalo versus Kansas City matchup coming in the future. But Trevor, with that, I wanted to move on, and because we're crunched for a little bit of time, I wanted to move on to just your the one final game. And I believe your final game, Trevor, was it the Bills and the Patriots?
It was
An interesting game. Go on to what do you want to talk about in
a
regards to
very
this blowout?
a very inconsequential game, right?
Sure.
Buffalo had already won the division. New England's out of the playoffs. I want to launch my I shouldn't say launch because I don't think he actually deserves it, but I think Josh Allen deserves to be in the discussion for MVP this year. I think he's been
Yeah.
unbelievable during their winning streak. He's now third in the NFL in passing yards. He's fifth in the NFL in touchdown passes, third in the NFL in QBR. I think he's had an unbelievable year. I think the way that Sean McDermott and Brian Dable, the offensive coordinator, have developed Josh Allen has been unbelievable. And getting a guy like Stephon Diggs, getting a true number one wide receiver is huge for a young quarterback. We've seen it with my Arizona Cardinals. Getting DeAndre Hopkins did wonders for Kyler Murray.
Mhm.
And I want to dedicate this whole game to talk about Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. I think Buffalo has been really, really good this year. They are looking really scary right now. But kudos to Josh Allen because a lot of people doubted him. You and I have doubted him. We have friends who have doubted him. And
Mhm.
his accuracy was an issue, but his accuracy has improved every year. I believe it was around 50% his rookie year, 58% last year, and up to around 68% this year. So that's a testament to that.
Mm.
And overall, just great job by the Buffalo organization and a well-deserved win on Monday Night Football to showcase to the whole world what they can do against a New England team that has ran that division for this entire century.
Yeah, so I'll make this quick. I have to touch on what you said about Josh Allen and the fact that you think he should be in the MVP conversation. I mean, to me, I think this is a two-person race. It's Mahomes and Rodgers. I think Rodgers deserves it. I think
I
that
agree.
he is the best quarterback in this league this year. Well, I think he's played statistically the best, and he's led his team to. I don't know if he's necessarily the best actual quarterback, but he's statistically the best quarterback. I mean, he's first in touchdowns, passing touchdowns at 44, fifth in passing yards, number one in passer rating, and he's number two in completion percentage with completing over 70% of his
Mm-hmm.
passes. And Trevor, to me, one of the biggest things here is in the red zone, 32 touchdowns and zero interceptions. I think that, the efficiency in the red zone, the ability to not turn the ball over when it matters most inside the opponent's 20, big momentum shifters is huge. So, this guy's been great for over a decade now, and I think that I think he deserves this award this year. But kudos to Josh Allen. You have said it, and I agree. He's had a great season, and he's continued to get better year after year. And wow, I did not expect him to become this good. I'm gonna be honest. I had my doubts about his accuracy, but as you said, his accuracy has improved year over year, and he's been fantastic. So, uh, you know, good for him. I think that to me, the key with the Buffalo Bills, Trevor, and I'll make this quick, I think the key is the run game. I think this run game they need to be able to run the ball at least somewhat efficiently, at least somewhat, provide some sort of threat on the ground. And they did that a little bit against New England. They had 130 yards on 4.2 yards a carry. So they did that decently well. But I want to see more of that. I want to see that game after game because you look at a team, Trevor, like the Pittsburgh Steelers, and why have they struggled so much in the last few weeks? They've struggled because ever since James Conner went on the COVID list and come back, their run game has disappeared. And they barely scraped out a win against the Colts team because the Colts defense choked very badly. But they can't even run the ball. I mean, they're a one-dimensional team. We'll see how they play on Sunday with Mason Rudolph under center. But I don't know. I think it's very important that these teams outside of Kansas City remain balanced because you feel decently confident as a defense if you can only if you go we only have to beat one aspect of their offense. We only have to be nervous about their passing game, not their run and pass, just the pass or just the run. So I think it's very important to have both of these aspects of this Buffalo offense running at full strength. But I will say they look fantastic against the Patriots. And the Patriots, to me, Trevor, it just shows you the impact Tom Brady had on this organization. I mean, look at the difference with and without him. I had people tell me, no, the Patriots will be a playoff team. They'll be very good. They struggled this year. I mean, they might finish at 6-10. What a downfall of a great dynasty. They might not ever be repeated again what they did in the NFL. Be good year over year, win that many Super Bowls. But I think they need receiver help. If you want to start somewhere, start at the receivers. I think that's key. They
Absolutely.
have zero receivers. N'Keal Harry's been a bust. I think it's important for them to get a receiver. So I'm going to leave it at that. But a lot to work on for New England, and I think Buffalo is definitely a threat if they can get that run game semi going.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. One final point, real quick, on
Sure,
Buffalo's running game. I want to say this. I think the threat of Josh Allen running the ball helps Buffalo
it does.
in terms of not really having to be super balanced in the run game. And Josh Allen can throw now. I mean, he can make all the throws. He can throw deep. He has accuracy now. So I think for Buffalo, a run game would be nice, but I don't think it's imperative that it's great. I just think it, as you said, it needs to be good enough to where teams will have to be honest and respect it. But I do think Allen's legs helps with that. But yeah, I think that will just about do it for this podcast. Ryan, it's
Yes,
been
sir.
a pleasure. Good to have you back. I hope Hawaii treated you well. Hope everyone who watched this podcast and everyone in general had a great Christmas holiday.
Yes, sir.
I think that'll do it for us. Ryan, if you have any
Yep.
final thoughts or any final words.
No, I think that just about does it. I just want to say, Colin Sexton for the All-Star Game 2021, and we're gonna wrap it up there. But we'll be back next week, Trevor, with yet another podcast. And I hope everyone has a great New Year, and we'll see you again in 2021.